3 years ago, Laquon Treadwell was the #1 wide receiver recruit in all of the land, and he was a part of that really good recruiting class for Ole Miss in 2013 for head coach Hugh Freeze. Now, 3 years later, Laquon Treadwell comes into the 2016 NFL Draft, a 6'2", 210-pound underclassman, as the presumptive, in many people's eyes, #1 wide receiver in the class. And is he that or is he not that? Well, I guess you're going to find out my thoughts here in a few minutes. Now, on one hand, I understand all the buzz about him, and I can understand the hype with him. You look at a guy 6'2", 210 pounds. He's got really good size for the position. More than plenty of size to be a #1 wide receiver at the NFL level. And furthermore, it's not just about his literal size. It's the figurativeness of how he uses that size. And what I mean is more so how big he plays. I look at basketball for a perfect example of this. Charles Barkley was all of 6'4", 6'4.5", but he was one of the great power forwards of all time, and he played like he was 6'9", 6'10". Dennis Rodman, one of the best defensive players of all time, power forward, who was all of 6'6", but at times he played like he was 6'10", 6'11", 7 feet. So it's not just the size you have, it's how you utilize that size and how big you play. And to me, Laquon Treadwell plays like a guy at times that is 6'5". He shows a really, really great ability to out-physical defensive backs, a guy with a really, really good catch radius, a guy that can go up and get the ball at its highest point. He can make some spectacular jump ball type of catches that you have to make at the NFL level, especially for a #1 wide receiver. You want that guy that can go up and get that jump ball. He can get that stop fade. He can get that fade over the shoulder. You know, he can do those different things, and he does that really, really, really well. And he's got really nice, soft hands. I mean, really, really nice hands. Consistently able to catch the ball and at all different angles in all different ways. Like I said, you take those hands, combine it with that really, really big catch radius that he has, makes a very, very nice target for a quarterback. But there's more than just that. He's a guy that showed me some ability to make some plays with his feet, with his ability to run after the catch. I mean, he's not a burner. He's not a guy that's going to make a ton of people miss, but he is a competent guy that can pick up some yards with his feet after the catch. But I also like his attitude. I like his toughness. I like his mentality. I like his fire in the belly, his competitive spirit. This is a guy that is fearless going over the middle, willing to go over the middle. And when you're a quarterback in a tough spot, 3rd and 6 late in the game, and you need 7 yards for a first down, you're probably going to have to make that throw into a tight throwing window over the middle of the field. You need a guy that's going to be fearless going over the middle, that will bail you out, that will make that big catch. And Laquon Treadwell shows me to be that type of guy. He's also a guy to me that shows a lot of fire in his belly when it comes to his willingness to be a blocker. And, you know, that's something that I don't always focus on the most, because I think at the end of the day, if you're talking about taking a wide receiver high and you're focused so much on his blocking ability, then you're not very good at your fucking job as a scout or a front office executive. But when it speaks to the completeness of his game, when it speaks to his willingness to work, his willingness to be a team player, I think it speaks very, very well to the football character of Laquon Treadwell, because this is a guy that shows a lot of fire in his blocking, is a willing blocker, and a somewhat able blocker. He's not incredible at it, you know, but he's competent at it, and you coach him up and get him better at it, where he could be an asset in the running game for you outside as a wide receiver. Somebody you could even, you know, as you got him into the NFL, you can motion him into the slot, and he could be a guy that could be an extension of the offensive line. I mean, he's got a really good effort level as a blocker. So I understand why a lot of people are very high on this guy. But I personally have some big question marks about him as to whether or not he could really become a true flight, top flight, #1 wide receiver at the NFL level. I look at a guy that doesn't show me a lot of burst or initial quickness, you know, and when you look at that, combined with a lack of really elite or really, really good straight line speed, he's probably got adequate straight line speed at the very best. Combined with the fact that at Ole Miss he didn't really run an expansive route tree, he's going to need to be better as a route runner in the routes that he can run now, and he needs to learn more routes and run better routes, frankly. It leads to the biggest question of all for him, which is his ability to separate. There were times at Ole Miss where I thought he struggled to gain separation, and the type of separation he would need to gain consistently at the NFL level to make himself a viable target for his quarterback. And I look at that Florida game as a good example of that. You know, when you look at that limited route tree, that lack of initial big-time burst, that lack of straight-line speed, you know, yeah, he's going to be tough to man up on because of his size and how well he uses his body, But if you get a bigger corner out there, he could really struggle against those type of guys because they can physical with them, and he's not going to be able to separate from them. Or if you get a guy that's really, really quick or really, really good in his back pedal, you know, Treadwell's not going to get a lot of room away from them. You know, he might not be the most inviting target for a quarterback to throw to because you're going to have to make a damn near perfect throw most of the time, or you're just going to have to throw it up and hope and pray. And sometimes that works, but sometimes that doesn't. And when it doesn't, it really doesn't. So, you know, from a physical standpoint, he's not the most athletic guy at the wide receiver position. I mean, yes, that's a big-time concern to me. In terms of other things, you know, you got to look at his fire in his belly and his competitiveness. And I think this is where some of the comparisons to Dez Bryant could come in, whether people realize it or not. He has a tendency at times to play to the whistle, through the whistle, and past the whistle. And I like that competitive spirit. I like that fire in the belly. But at the same point in time, that could be something at times that could get him into a bit of a trouble. He could sit there and cost his team 15 yards with a personal foul penalty. He also, at times, with that fire in his belly, I have concerns about whether or not certain defenses, certain teams, certain defensive backs could potentially get under his skin and get into his head, and they could take him completely out of the game as a result. I'm not saying that is going to happen, but sometimes you have to worry about those guys that are that fiery and that competitive on the flip side at the wide receiver position. Could they get so caught up in the bullshit like you saw with Odell Beckham for a stretch against the Panthers this year? He got so caught up in the bullshit that it took him out of the game for a while. And I have some concerns that sometimes that could happen with Laquon Treadwell. I also got to look at his injury history too. And you say, you know, he had this one big devastating leg injury and he came back well from it in 2015. You know, yeah, and it was just one big injury, but teams certainly are going to want to check out the medicals. They're going to want to check out the condition of that leg, check out and see if there's anything else. It could be a potentially an injury problem down the road. But I look at that injury history, and I see a guy that, frankly, in 2014 was much more explosive than he was in 2015. And if he suffers another big injury, if he tears up a knee or he suffers a major foot injury or something along those lines again, you know, what's going to happen? Is he going to lose quickness and speed that he already doesn't have in great abundance anyways? I think that's a legitimate concern, and that's going to give some NFL front offices and scouting departments a bit of pause when scouting Laquon Treadwell. Now, in terms of player comparisons, I've seen two that stand out. Dez Bryant, Alshon Jeffrey. I get both of them. I see some similarities to Dez Bryant, especially if we're talking about 2014 Laquon Treadwell, and that's probably the best comparison that you've got for him. It's kind of the safe, standard one, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. In some ways, he reminds me a little bit of Alshon Jeffrey when Alshon came out of South Carolina. Some questions about his initial quickness and deep speed, his questions about his route running, questions about his ability to separate. And when I look at a guy like Alshon Jeffrey, he has the ability at times to put up those big-time spectacular catches, make those big-time spectacular plays, and have those big-time, frankly, spectacular games, just like Laquon Treadwell, Megaquon, if you will. But on the flip side, because of that lack of initial burst at times and speed and ability to separate and that limited route running prowess, there are times where Alshon Jeffrey over the past 4 years in Chicago has been able to be taken completely out of the equation and been non-factors in a lot of games. And I see some of those same potential traits and elements in Laquon Treadwell. I do. Another player I could compare him to some at least would be DeAndre Hopkins, a guy with decent size and a really good catch radius, but not 6'5". They play bigger than their size, though, with really, really good hands. I think DeAndre Hopkins was a little bit quicker and a better route runner, but both had great high point ability to go get the ball at his highest point, but average deep speed. You know, neither one of them are really what you would classify as burners. That's not really the state of their game. So to me, I see the Dez Bryant comparisons. I see the Alshon Jeffrey comparisons. I see some comparisons as a prospect to DeAndre Hopkins. I don't know if there's one perfect comparison because, like I said, I can see a couple of those different players in Laquon. Now, in terms of my overall thoughts about him as a prospect, I look at him and I see why some people view him as the #1 prospect at the wide receiver position in the 2016 NFL Draft. Now, part of that, I think, is because for 3 years they've been waiting for this time, and he's been that as soon as he gets draft eligible, he'll be the #1 wide receiver. And sometimes it could be a self-fulfilling prophecy where a lot of the so-called experts, a lot of the so-called draft heads don't want to admit they're wrong, and they've built up a narrative for so long that they continue to look for ways to justify that narrative, and as a result, he becomes the presumptive #1 wide receiver, like I said, as much of a self-fulfilling prophecy and a defense mechanism as anything else. But there are things, like I said, that can lead people to think that. You look at his size, how he utilizes that size, a really good height-length combination. uses his body really well. He's not going to get out physical by a lot of people. He has a great ability to high point the ball. He's got an underrated ability to run with the ball after the catch. He's got that fire in the belly, a competitive spirit that you want out of a number one wide receiver. He has that fearlessness to go over the middle and make that big-time play. I don't think the lights are going to shine too brightly, and I don't think he's going to get intimidated by any defenses, and that's a good thing. But he's going to need to expand his route tree. He's not much of a route runner. He's also going to have to work on his quickness and his speed. And sometimes we talk about guys and quickness and speed, and I think we forget that those are things that can be improved upon. Those are things that can be worked upon. I can speak to myself as a 34, almost 35-year-old man. If I put 6 to 9 months of work into it, with weights and with sprint training and plyometrics and what have you, I could go out there and be a faster and quicker individual than I was when I was 18 years of age. So it's not unheard of that guys can get quicker and faster at the NFL level. It's not. So it's not automatically a kiss of death that if they don't have it in great abundance. But those concerns at this time make me wonder if he actually is going to be able to fulfill his potential as a number one NFL wide receiver. He doesn't have a lot of great burst off of the line, and he has adequate, at best, straight line speed, so the teams aren't going to feel like they have to provide a ton of safety help over the top. And that lack of burst and initial quickness and change of direction, change of speed, makes me wonder if he's going to be able to consistently separate enough to be a big-time weapon, a big-time target. And like I said, on film, to me, he seemed much more explosive in 2014. I could see more of the hype about 2014 pre-injury Laquon Treadwell being the number one wide receiver in this draft class than I could post-injury 2015 Laquon Treadwell, and that's just the truth of the matter. I think he's still going to be a quality wide receiver at the NFL level. I'm just not sure if he's going to be a star. I'm not saying he can't be a star or that he won't be a star. I'm just not sure that he'll end up reaching that ultimate ceiling of what many people envision for him. For me, for my money, I think he's still first-round talent, but I think he's more of a guy that you take in the 20 to 25 or 25 to 30 range than a guy that you take in the 6 to 10 or the 10 to 15 range. That's just me. I think there are guys that are more explosive, more athletic, more dynamic in this draft. But again, wide receiver is one of those positions as much as anything else. I think it's about the eye of the beholder, and it's about individual taste. It's about systematic fits. So, depending on the situation Laquon Treadwell goes to, how is he deployed? How is he utilized? What type of passing game? What type of talent does he have around him? How is he going to be featured? That could lead to a lot of whether this guy ends up being a 5 or 6-time Pro Bowler in his career, or he ends up just being an adequate to really, really good number 2 wide receiver that watches somebody else in the passing game on his team get the majority of the attention and the buzz. For my money, he's the number 3 wide receiver in the 2016 NFL Draft, and I don't think people should be surprised if he ultimately is not the first wide receiver off of the board. They probably will be, and maybe he will be the number 1 wide receiver off the board, and I could be completely, totally wrong. I've been wrong before, but there are other times I'm right, and I'm really right. I just get that sense that some teams are going to be really high on this guy, and other teams are going to have him a lot lower down the board than you might be led to believe or you might think is possible.